Hello. Welcome to our webinar, Product Ecologies, working with internal products. We're going to let one more minute go by, but let's just do some housekeeping while we wait for people to trickle in. Hi, I'm Dave Laribee, and I have with me Ann Steiner. We'll get into the webinar content in a minute. Love to get an active chat going and kind of see the chat. So Ann and I will just kind of be having a conversation around internal products, and we'll be monitoring the chat and participating as we can. If you have any questions for the end, which there should be plenty of time for discussion and questions at the end, please do use the Q&A feature in Zoom. If you look at the bottom of the toolbar, you'll see a box with a question mark, Q&A. Fire off your questions there. And we'll pick the ones that we feel like we can answer or speak to in some way, shape, or form.
I'll pick out all the hard ones for you, Dave.
Yeah, okay. We'll do that one. Well, that's
All right.
cool. Sounds about right. Okay. So let's get started. Welcome. This is Product Ecologies, working with internal products. We plan to kind of host a few of these events over the year, kind of exploring the product landscape. We'll get into why product ecologies in a minute. This is presented by our company, Nerd Noir. We're a consultancy that works with companies to help make better products faster, right? So we're kind of providing some coaching, some strategy, and kind of working with companies to improve their product and engineering organizations. That's good enough for now. And you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Ann Steiner. I'm a strategic advisor here at Nerd Noir, and pretty much just a product geek at the core. My background consists of about 10 years of being a software developer, about 10 years of being a product manager, both for internal and external products, and now almost 10 years of being a collaborator and a coach, helping organizations to adopt and product practices.
Hey everyone, Dave Larrabee. I lead Nerd Noir. My background is kind of in engineering leadership. I've done some product management and then kind of coaching in those areas. I worked for many years at Version 1, which was an agile tracking tool. So, really believe in agility as the principle, right? As a quality of a system, more than, a set of processes or certifications. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as Ann, kind of working with leadership, working with teams, kind of helping them, do some improvements that'll make them go faster. Most of my career is in product, I would say. It's before SaaS, it was called ISV, Independent Software Vendor, and I started one of those in the insurance space, around 2006, and we had a good ride for a while. Yeah, so product is very near and dear to my heart. I consider myself a product engineer, product architect, yeah, love to work in this space. So, when we're starting to think about products, this is just a product taxonomy framework that was very hastily created with Claude 3.7 Sonnet. You can see my prompt is below there. And I do want to call out, I referenced Jeff Patton's got a great post on identifying your products. And product taxonomy is kind of an important thing to have. It is kind of one dimension that we can look at is kind of what does our product organization often look like. And as you kind of read through this, there's all kinds of different attributes that we can attach to products. Like where is it in a life cycle? Are you really experimenting a lot to try find problem solution fit, or are you extracting all the value you can out of something that's close to end of life? So this is helpful, and it's a good thing to do, but it's just kind of one set of dimensions. I think there are other dimensions that we can think about. So when we're talking about internal products, we're really talking about those products that are kind of written by someone that has the same badge as the person that's going to use them. That's Ann's quote. And I just love that so much, right? These are the internal enablement products. So could be employee enablement, like CSR, call center rep. It could be, developer services. Like we have a platform that we think of as a product that provides an internal platform as a service or provides like CI/CD pipelines or vetted dependencies. All of those maybe developer
Could
experience group.
be, yeah, it
Yeah.
could be more operational, could be ERP, could be HMRS, all the tools that make the company go too.
Yeah, and they're not super visible from the outside, right? But they're super critical to the functioning of that company. So, we external products tend to, soak up all the attention and love or, sometimes hate, depending on how well you're doing with those. And then there's things that maybe we don't approach as full tilt products at all, right? There are SaaS offerings that are just purely black box. Your Office suite, maybe we don't Microsoft may think of that as a product. Google may think of that as a product. We don't, we think of it as kind of a utility that we use. And, so there's kind of a gradient there, but we're talking about internal products. So the other thing I think is that when we start thinking about this product stack in our full product taxonomy, we can also think in terms of dependencies or needs a relationship. So this is kind of part of a Wardley map. I didn't want to overwhelm people with everyone, but we can start to look at how these things kind of depend on each other. And so the people using the mobile app don't have to think about their CI/CD pipeline unless it fails, right? Because it's a service provider. They don't have to think about Salesforce being available because there's an SLA around the contract with Salesforce. They can just build on top of it, right? Or they can integrate with it.
And
So
I think it's really important what you're showing here, Dave. A couple different things is like internal products. It's going to be rare that it's ever going to stand alone. That it isn't going to have sister products, and some of those sister products may be external products as well. So we need to understand that we're not functioning in isolation. We're functioning in a product ecosystem.
yes, I mean, this is the ecology aspect of it, right? And so decisions that are made here impact anything, could potentially impact anything that has a line, connected to it, right? And so this is where now you get into at scale, kind of hopefully necessary but complexity, right? This is where, making those decisions. So one example that we could think of is we run into all the time is like an experience group that's trying to do some kind of service blueprint. And in order to do that, right, the mobile app will get touched, but also there might be some additional tooling that needs to add to the developer service. There's some integrations here, there's some data platforms, and this is where you get like your technical program manager involved. This is where that role kind of rose to help with those things. And we see these all the time. So often there's like new products up here that are going to like mean impacts to these other products or needs to those other products. And that is a complex undertaking. And it's not easy thing. We're not here to minimize that, but internal talk products will often feel that.
Hey Dave, before you jump too, um, I want to call out your third box on the right hand side here, which is not products. And one trap I see a lot of well-meaning organizations try to go to is they adopt a product model as now everything's got to be a freaking product all of a sudden. No, only products are products, okay? Products is the thing that we build or the service that we provide that impacts people. Not everything will be a product. Don't force it, use some common sense. I worked with a client once, and again, they had all the best of intentions, but they made products and a product team and a product manager literally around like the screens and tech and phones that sat in conference rooms. That's not a
Yeah.
product, that's an infrastructure. So here you kind of see some examples. Some of these maybe are somebody else's product that they're selling to you, but you don't need to manage it like a product. That's making it harder than it needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I will say, like a product focus, whether or not you're strictly a product or funded as a product, or you have like tick all the boxes, this is a pretty valid focus for anything, kind of to use Anne's riff as a segue. I mean, Nerd Noir, we're essentially ostensibly a service company. We're coaches, but we take a product focus. We really think about outcomes. We really focus on our user, which is, CTO, CPO, engineering manager, engineers, those kinds of folks, PMs. We really try to kind of engender a continuous evolution, thinking about value. Are we providing enough value? Is the client getting enough value? Are we shaking the value out together that we can? And then, this kind of systems thinking. So I think that, the point is not to drain the slide or to read everything here, but these are kind of your non-negotiables. I don't know if anyone's watched the series The Bear, when Carmy writes negotiable. These are those non-negotiables. These make a lot more sense than his did, but I think anyone you want to pick on, Ann?
Yeah, I think given the current market and kind of where we're at in terms of agility and product maturity, but also, just financially, I think a lot of companies are having to work a little harder. We're seeing a lot of change at a time of a lot of uncertainty too. We've got AI coming in. Um, Continuous evolution and holistic thinking are really standing out to me. All these should be like, yeah, yeah, we know, the product 101, but I think these are two where we tend to, and we includes us as product managers, maybe we're good about saying it and we're not good about doing it. And here, check yourself. Pull up Jira. How many months of stories do you have in there? You're not continuously evolving if you're sitting on 6 months of backlog. Pull up your roadmap. How many years does it cover? How off, when was the last time you changed it? When was the last time you decided not to do something that was on that because it didn't make sense anymore? If you can't say pretty darn recently, maybe challenge yourself in terms of continuous evolution and that holistic thinking.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a revenge of kind of project management, which,
Yes.
really have a problem with project management. We think kind of like product versus project is kind of not the right, you know, versus it's not the right, they're not the right
Yeah.
poles, not
It's not
polar.
a war, it's not adversarial.
Exactly, exactly. However, we're seeing people kind of retreat to this model where you fund a project, you have all your brightest minds kind of swarm on that project, and then when it's done, right, you have a team in India kind of take over the KTLO or BAU of that,
I
right?
think a
And
lot of it is, Dave, we're working in uncertain times, and in uncertain times, people they they fear risk and they're hungry for certainty. And there's this myth, and I've never understood it from day one in my career, but there's this myth that traditional project management and those methods are more certain. Um, they're not. They never were. It's a fallacy. So if you're striving for certainty and you're striving to reduce risk, strive for smaller increments because that's what will actually do that.
yeah, I want to move on, but I mean, this one over here, outcome focus. When you commit to focusing on outcomes, you are committing to a life of uncertainty. It is not an easy life. It's not predictable. It isn't us deciding what we're going to build. It's us asking what we need to build that people need, right? And that will be viable for us long term. It is a harder way to go, right? And so there we can start to kind of look at why you might pick projects as maybe steering you away from the outcome focus.
And that outcome focus is a shift in thinking from when will we be done to when have we achieved what we needed to achieve.
Right, exactly. So another set of commonalities are, what's your culture like? And I think there is, if we look at define culture as a set of norms and behaviors that are, kind of common within an organization or a boundary, um, there are definitely product behaviors, right, that kind of form that culture, right? From planning, we can kind of riff off where we were just going. So
Mhm.
comprehensive upfront planning and documentation, the end all be all of PRDs, product requirement documents, to just enough planning with continuous adjustment, maybe some forecasting, maybe you're road mapping a little bit more than you are trying to hoard in a backlog. Um, the size of delivery rather than kind of delivering as one big thunking set of modules and an ERP at the end, you're really kind of thinking more use cases and trying to have unlocks of value and feedback as time goes on rather than ta-da, here you go, everything's cut over. Anyone you want to call out here, Ian?
Yeah, I'd like to look to decision making, Dave. Product managers ask me a lot, how do I convince the boss that I'm right or that they're wrong? And I think back in the day that was a lot harder because we didn't have data, we didn't have the ability to collect the data in the large samples that we have today. We didn't have AI, we didn't have a lot of things. So when it came down to trying to convince somebody, ultimately at the end of the day, whoever had the bigger paycheck or the fancier office won now. And this has been a progression, of course, but we are able to validate and we are able to collect more or less undisputable data to prove a point. So if you want to try to prove a point or try to push something, conduct an experiment, collect some data, and learn from that. And you're going to talk about that in a few slides here. But that's, to me, it's perfect because maybe the boss is right. Maybe I am wrong, but maybe I'm right. And maybe the boss is wrong. Let's seek to prove it. Then we all can be sure.
Yeah. So these are the commonalities, right? This commonality of focus areas and what I'm not a big fan of the term mindset, but what takes up our mind share? What are we looking at kind of
Mhm.
constantly? And also how are we acting and behaving, right? These we think apply to anything you want to label as product. And sometimes things we might label as not a product, right?
Yeah. And they certainly apply to internal products just as much as external.
And why don't you take this one?
Okay, yeah, I guess I'm kind of going this way. So, as you think about your external products or your internal products, we just have to use a little common sense. On the external side, you're gonna see you're just gonna have a little different type of market, and you're gonna probably have money rearing its ugly head a little bit more prominently than you're gonna have on the internal side. But as we look at some of these, and this slide is basically juxtaposing some fundamental foundational rocks, external versus internal. You see the slight differences. Okay, customer facing applications now become employee or team facing systems within our org. Market forces are really going to be about helping the company to achieve its goals and its strategy. So often we might see this is going to be about saving time and this is going to be about saving money. But a lot of orgs right now, as they're investing in AI, they're trying to make their products and their services better. They're trying to make support better, faster, more consistent, more efficient. So we're not hopefully always with our internal products trying to just squeeze money out of the system. On the external side, we always have to ask ourselves, are our products profitable? And it's almost disturbing how many products really don't know if they're profitable or not. I recently worked with a client, they only had one product and they really didn't have a good look at the P&L for that product. They only had a P&L for the company. Uh, and if this is something that your company struggles with, check out Luke Holman. He's got some real good materials in a book about this, but we got to know if we're getting the value. Customer facing products, a lot of times that value will be ultimately represented in revenue and profit. Internally, that's a little more difficult. I don't want it to always be about cost saving or saving money, but you should be getting some form of return. And think and challenge yourselves as you talk about metrics and outcomes. What are the returns that we're expecting to get? And last but not least, customer feedback is so important, but as a lot of product folks on this call, we know that that can be hard to get, or we don't want to burn out our loyal users by asking them question after question after question. Well, now those loyal users are our coworkers. So here we have the opportunity. I can just send a Slack message to Dave and be like, hey, can I show you something? We're doing this thing. Or, there's a question on the chat right now, and we'll come back to it in Q&A, but just to quickly touch on it, they're asking, hey, what are some leading indicators? Or if I'm early in an internal product start, what metrics should I be looking at? Now we can start to talk to people, understand the problems that they're really getting, and construct outcomes around solving those problems. So just having that access and bringing those users in, they will feel like they're a part of it and they're not getting stuck with this thing. And you're going to get this valuable information up front so that as you're building, you're not steering too far from true north or from what's going to really make a difference for your customers.
Nice. We will get to the questions at the end, Ilya. So that's a great question. We'll revisit it in a minute. So some practices make sense, right, in this space, right, as kind of universal good ideas if you're going to go down the product way. Product-based funding models, investing in developing your staff, right? So the kind of skills around product and in even roles beyond PM. So I think of like the product engineer thing that came out of some of the Y Combinator research is this kind of the engineer that's very product focused, has very good working relationships with folks like designers and product managers, has a model and is that mind share we talked about is part of the way they think. And that isn't, you're not born with that, right? You have to kind of be put in that those conditions and given that challenge and that support. The other thing is like right sizing your discovery system. Like how do you create insights that you can act on is what I mean by discovery system. And I think, there's a lot of consultants out there and we're, part of this, of course, right? But there is a discovery method for every product consultant coach out there. And the thing is, there's so many options. We really kind of encourage almost using that Unix philosophy of finding a few tools that work well together and make sense for what you're doing, which is takes a lot of restraint because you go to a conference or you attend a webinar like this and you want to try some new tools, but what's going to make sense in your context is where you're going to find the tools that will stick with you for a career, right? And work and what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think another test on that one is if it takes days or weeks or multiple, months to execute discovery on a body of work, you need to ask yourself, is it right sized? And is that body of work too big? Because probably one or the other has gotten a little bloated.
There's probably a power law distribution in terms of like discovery missions or ambitions, right? Where if you're going to be like Disney and just change your whole park and film watching an entire experience, that's quite a lot of discovery that you want to get ahead of, right?
Yeah.
Think about Jared Spool's kind of covering that use case. But for most of our work, we're not on that left side of that power law. We're really talking about smaller features or, hunches that we want to act on, maybe some internal, smaller bets. Those things don't require, a massive service blueprint and a ton of that stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Well said.
we think like the journey to product is not an easy one, and we do think that it is greatly helped if you can kind of create a community, which is not an easy thing to do. But a guild community where you can have some support in some of these roles we've seen that as being kind of helpful, especially if you're at early stages in that product model adoption, or if you're really trying to reinvigorate. Sometimes our clients are just, they've done it, they're trying to reinvigorate their product operating model. So that can help.
Yeah, and I would say too, this guild, it doesn't need to be like a center of an agile center of excellence or a transformation office or something like that. Even regardless of your company's maturity, even in advanced product models, just to have like a product managers protection association where y'all can get together and blow off some steam and help each other, because those connections with other product managers down the road, not only are they friends, but they're also people that can help us get what we need in outside of our own organizations. So, definitely find each other and definitely be there for each other. I think, this is passing a little bit, but there was a while kind of in the early 2000s where I saw a lot of companies that thought it was a good idea to pit their product managers against each other because that competition would mean more productivity. That was about the silliest darn thing I've ever seen. Because product managers need to work together.
Other practices we think for internal products specifically are maybe a little bit too much or maybe misapplied to the context. I mean, jobs to be done. Great framework. Have used it. Particularly like B2B or B2C products. I think that it's maybe a little bit overkill when you can just reach out to the population that you're serving, right? And you can kind of understand that. Now, doing something hasty, I think this is a great use for AI. Is to say, walk me through jobs to be done using the notes that I collected with this interview or talking to this colleague, right? So if you can do it quickly and if it can be provide some value, or if it doesn't provide value, you can reject it. That would be kind of a litmus test for this. I am seeing, I mentioned this already, but a lot of like YouTube videos of PM, aspiring PM thought leaders, product management thought, product thought leaders, developing PRDs that are just, sorry, but they're BRDs, business requirement documents. It's kind of revenge of the business analysts. And they're long requirements documents, handoff driven, stage gate, sequential, waterfall kind of process, shutting off the feedback, all the kind of stuff that we have been kind of arguing for many years. You want to pick on one, Ann?
Yeah, I'll pick on stage gate regulatory crud, which is my technical term. Some orgs are going to be facing regulatory constraints or, some sort of legislative constraints, and that's an understood constraint that can't be changed. But I often see those things being used to justify use of a waterfall model. And I personally, I've been involved in a ton of audits as a developer, as a product manager. I've worked in a lot of highly regulated industries, and more times than not, the regulation is as simple as you need to document the process that you're using and be able to prove with traceability from end to end that you are executing with the documented process. Staged gates often, again, not always, but often, particularly in the software world, are a legacy process that simply could be changed or adjusted in the documentation of the process. So ask yourself, is this stage gate really necessary, or is it a legacy artifact of our process that could potentially be changed? Also ask yourself, instead of running a body that's 3 years or 1 year through the stage gate, if I can't change the stage gates, could I run a body of work that's maybe a month through the stage gates? So really push back on that. If you're seeing that, understand the why and understand the actual legislation that you have to adhere to. Because I often see companies, they're creating their own policy and legislation, which in turn then is making it harder.
Yeah. Yeah, we this one is particularly triggering in, we work for a bunch of consumer electronics or companies that have a hardware that go with, the software. It's a very common scenario for us at Nerd Noir.
Mhm.
And it's also very common to see the most regulated group, which is often the hardware, right? Driving the workflow of the
Yes.
least regulated group, which is often the software. And so having like that kind of nuance and saying, look, this one product has actually a few different kind of needs going on, or even cultures or operating models going on, is really counter, I think, to the human desire for consistency or simplicity or the one way. And we often, kind of arguing to break that way up a little bit and say, look, let's hardware deal with its constraints, let software, luxuriate in its constraints. Right. So
Yeah, well said. I saw the same thing with a financial services company many years ago. They're worried about FINRA and all of that regulation, but they were using the exact same rigor that they were for their banking app as they were literally for microsites that were just advertisement. Apply the rigor where the rigor is needed.
yeah. you know. All right, let's move on to the next one. So this one needs a little bit of explanation. You can raise your hand if you recognize the image. Oh, I heard a pop. Oh, pop. Well, I know you two recognize it. Okay. So, this is the Butterbot from a cartoon, Rick and Morty. Rick Sanchez is a multi-dimensional super genius scientist he has a fair amount of contempt for he's a bit of a misanthrope, I'll say. But he's fiddling around at the dinner table, and he creates this thing called Butterbot, and it comes to life, and it's has self-awareness. It is a fully true AI, right? It is like I exist, Cartesian, I think, therefore I am kind of level of AI. And then ask Rick, what is my function? And Rick says, you pass butter. And the robot's response is, oh my God, right? So he's capable of much more intellectually, but he's been built to pass butter. You are not a butter passer, right? Is kind of one thing we want to stand out here. You are not an order taker, right? This is the hardest battlefront for product managers, I think internally, especially, right? Where there's
Yeah.
see to, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Like we all struggle with it a little bit, but I think internal product managers, it's even worse because the requests are coming from inside. Maybe we feel an obligation. And we're kind of dealing with this different role, the stakeholder role, where with external products, we have the buyer and the user, and often they're different people and different personas, and that's fine. We know we have to appeal to both. But internal products, we tend to have stakeholders and the users, and stakeholders are a little different because they might be our boss or they might be really, really senior to us. And so it can make it difficult to say no to them, or even better, not now. Also, a lot of times they may tend to dictate to us implementation. I want you to do X. I always try to take that conversation back to what do you see us struggling with? What problems are we facing? And then start to shift that back to them describing the problem and say, you know what, we'll go after that problem. We may not do it in the exact way you just said, but we'll attack that problem.
Yeah. I like my partner Alex has one that's like, let me look into that. You know, it's a real good hack because then the time may go by and the whim may pass, or, you have an obligation to look into that. But, they're another one, an Alexism is no is a complete sentence. So anyway, we're pretty good at saying no, this is what, or some of us are. So, let's turn the tide from the negative to, hey, what's positive here? Like, what can you do? Like there's an advantage to be exploited here as an internal product, professional, right? That access to internal users is, I mean, it's a gold mine. There's like literally no excuse for not talking to your customers when they're on the same Slack instance or Teams instance as you, right? I mean, you have to get over maybe an introverted sense, or, for me, it's sometimes a little bit in energy giving to have to go out and, network and talk to people, but it can be done. The access that you're getting is rare, right? It's lucky. External products you have to go through a lot more kind of gymnastics and procedure and effort to find prospects that can teach you something about the product. And, the best way to learn about are we on the right track is delivery. It's unfortunately the most costly way to learn about that. So, even access to users there is not the ultimate feedback, right, loop. We see stakeholder management as, if you hear this word stakeholder, I always picture someone just holding like a piece of steak. But when you hear this over and over and over again, that can be a sign that maybe we're not focused a little bit on the users or the problem or the outcomes that we're trying to foment.
I think you're hungry a lot, Dave, if you're thinking about steak.
About
Yeah,
35 minutes late to lunch here, so
yeah, yeah. Maybe have your iron levels checked too.
yeah.
But in all seriousness, he's raising a great point. And again, you think of that customer or buyer user split on the external side. We're going to have that stakeholder user split on the internal side. What's the difference between a stakeholder and a user? A stakeholder often is going to be someone who's knowledgeable about the area and maybe is bringing some money to the table and investment in this initiative. The user is the person who's touching it, who's feeling it, who's clicking, who's mousing. Okay. Those are a difference. You need to get opinions from both because the stakeholders can be 100% wrong. And although you may get their investment, you don't necessarily know what the user needs are or if it's going to be effective. Now, another cool advantage that I think you have is that internal product manager is you understand way more about the context your users and stakeholders are working in, and you're allowed to have a lot of what would normally be private or non-disclosure type information. So leverage that. You know your company's ecosystem, you know your company's goals. You can learn that team or group you're serving, what their needs are, what their life is like. Go sit behind them at their desk, do contextual inquiry, and really get into their world because you're going to have access in a way that you wouldn't in other scenarios. And depending on the size of your company and the breadth of your product, there may only be one context like that. With an external product, there could be hundreds or thousands, and we have to balance all those needs across. So that could potentially even simplify matters for you.
Yeah, so I think in users are the kind of solid gold for internal products. I have changed the names to protect the innocent, but I mean, I had a story where, I just funded a startup. We were building something for workers' compensation. That's all I'm going to talk about, just because going deep on that subject is a great way to end conversations at cocktail parties. But we had found a reference customer to kind of implement our software, and it was a big change for them because they had an existing process, very paper heavy. There was some bespoke internal software they were using, but we had a kind of a turnkey solution, and it was a big migration of, imagine scanning tons and tons of workers' comp files, and a big learning lift for not the most insurance adjusters at the time weren't the most technologically savvy people. And just a lot of, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And this woman, Kathy, was the director of the adjudication department, and she friggin' hated this thing, right? She was very kind of foaming at the mouth about how this thing sucked, our thing, and how it was never going to work. And, my reaction to that was to try to listen to her, I think, more than anything, and kind of bring her a little bit closer in the fold. You know, Kind of long story short, Kathy ended up being kind of part of our steering committee, implementing this software. I ended up running user stories by her. She was very like, we didn't have a roadmap back then, but she was, very aware of what was coming and contributed toward it. And she became our biggest proponent, right? She went from a critic to a passionate user, and brought her team along with her. Now, I think there's a couple things about Kathy. One, extremely courageous lady, right? And so paying attention to those users that are willing to speak up, there's always going to be the people that are going to talk, right? But there's content in that oftentimes. And trying to mine that content, that can be where insights live, right? Also, I think as a success measure, when that person's attitude changes from haterade to promoter, 10 on the NPS, you've done something, right? That means that other people are probably feeling that as well. That is a qualitative measure, and it's a very empathetic measure, but it's a very valuable measure. So I think we're all aware of the passionate user. This is my story. It is real. If you could start thinking about creating those promoters, even using kind of NPS as a lightweight, maybe temporary metric, this can be really helpful.
I love this story, Dave, because there's a lot of Kathys out there, and Kathys are heroes. But at first, as product managers, sometimes they intimidate us. They seem cranky and mean, and they see not nice things, and they're very boisterous and seem like whiners, maybe. But
Yeah.
you did the exact right thing there of, hey, let's lean into that. Let's really listen to them. Let's understand the problems, because a lot of times they aren't just whiners, they just know what's going on and they're so passionate about it, they care so much that it comes out as frustration.
Yeah, I got lucky on that one to pick the lucky path. I'm might have been slightly afraid of Kathy as well, but anyway, I it worked out in the end. And we enjoyed a great relationship and some laughs looking back on our rough start, right? So another thing we really want to kind of talk about is that right size discovery system, and how do you kind of discover and execute and keep that lightweight? We think there's a lot of great ideas. Some of you will recognize this. The double diamond comes from design thinking, the D school. We love it. We think this is a great, model for kind of this diverge, converge on a problem, diverge, converge on a solution. And we do this naturally to some extent in the way we work across like product and engineering. But formally, this process is kind of heavy, right? It's designed to produce, I mean, it comes out of the industrial design tradition of producing carrot peelers. That was Oxo Goodgrip's IDEO's first product using, this is where this comes from, or a case study, right, from this. We're not making chairs, right? We're not making, um, sometimes we're making consumer electronics with software, but, you know, thinking about your process and trying to pick something that makes sense for your context, not just something you want to try because it's cool, is the restraint that we're talking about. We see all kinds of sketchy implementations of this double diamond, for example. We'll do a high-low. On the left side, what does this look like to you? It looks like stage, gate, phase, sequential, waterfall development. It's a long-ass process, which again, power law distribution, some rare times that's appropriate. Bet the company times, right? That might be appropriate. Got to change everything times that might be appropriate. But releasing a feature in an internal product, it's overkill, right? On the right is kind of the underkill story. This is the kind of the Jira cognitive style of Jira and ticket driven development. PM has an idea, a whim, an order they're taking, something like that. They put it in Jira. Dev just takes from the top, interprets whatever's in this Jira ticket issue and builds it, and then, solution, and we're done, right? I mean, there's no real concept of iteration here. There's handoff driven. We don't know where these ideas are coming from. We see these environments as, not saying ticket driven is always wrong, but we see these environments when it is wrong as kind of creating bad blood or silos between the engineering and the product side, right? So you can overdo it and you can underdo it, right? Right size. We want to spread the joy of process minimalism, right? More collaboration, less process. So you may recognize this loop from the lean startup world where it comes from, but the idea is, well, we've got some idea or notion. We're gonna try to make a small experiment and build it, put it out there, see if people use it, like it, care about it, get that data, see what insights we can derive, rinse and repeat. So it's a loop, it's not a sequential line.
I really like this slide, Dave. Although the bones of it are kind of basic scientific method or whatever you want to call it, but you've got a couple of really interesting things here. And one that I like is as we go after we have released, a feature, an experiment, whatever it happens to be, and release can mean different things, and we all know that. But you go into that measuring, we have to release something before we can measure something impactful. I see a lot of teams really focusing on the measure around the build. That answers the question, how are we working? It doesn't answer the question, are we building the right thing? And then to use that data to actually learn and then to adjust the ideas that we're going to build based on that. That is such an interesting path there and kind of a different way of displaying this versus a lot of traditional pictures. We must adjust our ideas based on what we have measured and learned.
So this is it. I mean, that, from a process perspective, this data can come from logs, right? We don't need necessarily a crazy product analytics. If you got it, great, right? System. These ideas can be, hey, that worked pretty well. Let's go a little bit deeper. Let's iterate on that idea. Or you know what? Hey, you win some, you lose some. Delivery taught us something. Delivery is a discovery tool, right? And we're gonna pick the next thing that we think is most promising, right? And then, overall, the thing that makes this work is keeping stuff small, right? So keeping these release features or experiments tiny, keeping your experiments cheap, right? Gets that value unlock and waves of value, and it really gets to, some of that value may be feedback and like you're headed in the wrong direction or there's a slightly better direction to go in. Overall, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but the discovery systems that we're helping clients to build follow this pattern. What is the desired outcome? Usually that is, a lagging outcome around like a business outcome, like growth in the market or something like that. And then a leading outcome, how do we need customer behaviors to change? Those can be modeled as OKRs. We have a framing process for that. But then right immediately, it's like, who's it for? Like, who are we building for? What motivates them? What are some of their kind of traits? What activities are they trying to get done? How will they use it to complete that activity? What is the end-to-end thing that they need to the job, that they want to get done? How can we chunk up value to think about that build, measure, learn to get feedback or to release early value, right? And then, what structure or behavior changes do we need to be in the system? We kind of use specification by example, ATDD, TDD kind of to drive that. And then what feedback did we get? And then around and around we go, right? So the theme of loops should be pretty clear here. So does this apply to COTS or SaaS, systems that are just heavily configured? We think so. I mean, we've worked for many a Salesforce team that had a lot of code, and a lot of applications building on this platform, right? We think that, when we start looking at like ERP systems, there's a tendency to roll those out and develop them in the consultant driven way, which is we want to do a big bang thing to move on to the next thing, right? And we really think, no, kind of more of a use case or journey driven way can be done. We've seen it done. We've helped companies do it. So what that means is, you may have an incumbent system that you're replacing. We're going to peel off some of the key use cases and enable the workforce with those while, keep continuing to peel off additional use cases until we can sunset this thing rather than a big thunking transition. So that's a product approach to things like SAP, things like your, crusty old mainframe system. That's a pretty new one, it looks like, but still, either way expensive, right? Anything you want to add here, Ann?
No, you covered it. Well said.
All right, so let's wrap it up. Few keys to success. I would challenge your organization's product mindset. Examine the things that we should be focusing on. Examine pay attention to your behaviors and the behaviors you model, but also the behaviors that you observe. I mean, those things, when they're off, that points to usually it's a root cause for some other problems down the line. Fostering a genuine partnership with end users, get to know your end users, you know, um, build a relationship with them. If we can kind of get to a discover and build with versus a discover and build for approach, I think, you're going to get to that Kathy X story, which will be a good indicator of success. Real world feedback, your decisions. I mean, we can still find data. It is actually very direct data. It is usually very accessible. Marty Kagan says it's one of the things that a product team needs to have is access to that product data. But also, don't discount qualitative feedback. You can have a demo with your users and solicit their feedback. So it isn't just like a feature theater moment, but it is actually a moment where you're actually getting, oh, we really like this. We're going to intend to use this. We can track that intent with the logs. I mean, there's ways of turning these kind of by rote ceremonies into actual useful sessions, right, in events. Yeah, right size your discovery practices. I think all product nerds want to try everything out. I'm one of them. I've been guilty of that. I'm putting this out here so you'll hold me accountable just like I'll hold you accountable to that. Right. So I get the human tendency to want to try everything. Maybe, when you learn something new, try to understand the principles driving that thing and see if those principles can apply to what you're doing. Right. And then lastly, focus on user outcomes over system constraints, particularly like in that package software or SaaS or ERP type stuff. Uh, just because we've always implemented it this way doesn't mean we can't take a different product-oriented approach to implementing things. So we don't need to go module by module. We can go use case by use case. that may seem initially more expensive, but then we have to kind of offset the value that we're unlocking as we do that, right? So
Exactly. And it may seem initially more expensive, but I promise you long term it is not, because that's going to keep us from rolling out and in non-COTS cases, building functionality we don't actually need or won't be used. Always remember building the software is the cheap part. Maintaining the software over the long haul and later having to move your employees off of something that wasn't valuable. That's the expensive part.
yeah, yeah. So that's pretty much it. I mean, we can help. We have a number of workshops that are really around, articulating a change and rolling it out and kind of the change management piece. We have an organizational design workshop that has become pretty popular. But we also have product workshops that span from the kind of strategic to the very tactical stuff. So from everything from building your discovery system, and getting that tuned up and working, to like, hey, what should we actually go after? What's our biggest challenge? How are we going to address that? We offer collaborator subscriptions that is kind of like part-time fractional help around this. These people have been product managers, product leaders, and work within our system really well. And lastly, we have internal talks. I'll just highlight this. If this is something you're interested in bringing to your organization, I'll put this into the chat. Um, we do a number of talks, Ann and I, and we have other collaborators that will join. Um, we cover a lot of area across product and engineering and the different levels from leadership to contributor. We're happy to do a jam session, a whiteboarding session, a version of this talk, whatever, get in touch with us, tell us what you need, what messaging you're trying to get there, and we can discuss, hey, how could we help? And we offer a few of these free every quarter. So please avail yourself of that if it makes sense.
Yeah, and a lot of times, sometimes you just need someone to come in from out of town to kind of say the things you've been saying, get the leaders kind of
Yeah,
excited, a little stoked, maybe get the team a little stoked, and then all of a sudden, they want to play.
exactly. So yeah, thank you so much for your time and attention. Um, if you want the recording, the best, fastest way to get that is to subscribe to our newsletter, newsletter.nerdnoir.com. It's very occasional. It's value oriented, or it's not too salesy of a newsletter. And yeah, we it's like a once a month thing. Here's how to get in touch with Ann and I. We both love to have you connect with us on LinkedIn. We're heavy users there. And beyond that, I think we have a couple of questions that we're going to take up here.
Yeah, Dave, so I'll help you with this a little bit. I've answered a couple of them, but I saved you a couple hard ones. So, first up from Ilio, while I find the lean startup methodology highly valuable, I'm wondering if it should be adapted for internal audiences. For instance, would you suggest using a landing page before solution is built to validate demand among internal user stakeholders? I'm wondering if the approach needs to be modified to align with the specific dynamics of an internal environment.
Yeah, that last sentence I think is very wise. I think I would
Mhm.
apply that to anything you're doing. So yes. Um, as far as like an Oz MVP or like trying to assess demand with a cheap experiment like that, I've seen that take place. I've seen the kind of thing where it's the phantom button where, it's a new button shows up on the screen and people click it and it's like implement, coming soon. Um, I think that at a certain scale, let's say you have 1,000 CSR agents, that may not make sense considering how, rigorous and measured their workflow probably is and like their performance really is. It's smaller things. If you're trying to get buzz and just assess if people are interested in it, like I think the Ash Miura 10x, 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 like where if I can get 100 people that are interested in this product, that means I could probably get 1,000. I could probably get to 10,000, like using those kind of things. I would recommend Testing Business Ideas by David Bland for a really rich source of experiments that might be, I mean, there's like 25 something different kinds of experiment templates that you can look at. One of those is Oz MVP, but there's a ton in there. And so kind of going through that and saying what's appropriate for internal products. I just, I think it's a great resource, and we kind of reference that in some of our workshops. So I would look at that. Yeah, not to give you a total consulting, it depends answer, but kind of does. Context is what we're driving for here. Yeah, I'd say look at that as a menu. And none of these I think make sense as blanket approaches. Um,
Hmm.
I would say one thing that hardly ever makes sense is A/B testing, especially in the smaller populations that you get with internal, even if you're an internal app is, like Home Depot's, floor mobile thing, there's tens of thousands of users maybe, right? But you don't necessarily generate the traffic or the kind of movement to justify an A/B test, or you're not going to get signal through noise, or you don't have a behavioral economist working with you to really understand why things are working. So yeah, it may work for Meta, but it might not work for an internal app at, I don't know, Lowe's or I don't know.
Yeah, I think the main thing he's saying that's just so well put and is a great takeaway for all of us from this webinar is the approach needs to be modified to align with the specific dynamics of an internal environment. And this is one of the places where we're lucky because it's easier for us to understand that, and there's one and only one. So we can make the product fit. When you're working with external products, you're going to have many to many relationship there, more than likely. So yes, you're dead on, dude. We should adjust. We should use common sense, and yeah, we should look for those special ways and leverage our insider information about the organization to find them. All right, what do you think, Dave? You got time for one more?
Sure. What do we got?
All right, so this one is coming from either a fake Alex West, a real Jess Brock, a real Alex West. It's unclear. But they say you mentioned the path to product being hard. Can you share an example of a company who embarked on the product journey and succeeded? And when I answered, I kind of beat around the bush a little bit, so I want to hear what you say.
I mean, yeah. I mean, recently we we're about to release a case study. This is a small post Series B SaaS company that Ann worked with in a collaborator role. And yeah, I mean they have a product, right? And but this group came from kind of an agency background. And so the way they were applying things was very project oriented because it's in their bones, it's in their, DNA. And I think Ann, you were really successful in just taking some baby steps and getting them to think about, well, what is our product strategy and how are we going to reach out to customers maybe in a different way than we have in the past, and just not coming and rushing at them with everything, because the intent was to be a product company. They're a friggin' product company, right? But this saying, okay, let's take these little pieces and piece by piece work on each piece. And then I think the it really proved, something we believe, which is that you don't start with mindset. You don't, start by putting a bunch of values and principles on people's screensaver on their work laptop, right? You start by doing, and in the curiosity, and be surrounded by someone that knows kind of where they're going. um that mindset and those kind of that focus emerges, and the culture starts to change, right? And so I think that was a really good success, and it wasn't like going from nothing to product. And you're not going to find that in these product paths. You're going to find different people on different, mile markers on those paths, and you kind of got to get them to the same mile marker and start doing the work, and then trusting that the behavior and focus will emerge. I don't know, and that's my read. I just
Yeah,
did you, and they loved you, and that was the sum up of it. So
that's a great example, and I really like your point about nobody's exactly starting from scratch. Everyone's in a different place. Some things I look for is I look for a product management department. Is there one? Yes or no? In the example you were mentioning, there was one with some highly skilled people in it, but that they were kind of due to founder dilemma and some other reasons, they were more in the order taker space. And one of the things we were able to do was start having arguments with data, get out of the order taker space, conduct experiments. And I put a little bit more in the chat for folks, but product management is the place to start. You have to have it, and it has to have some sort of influence. So those are two really quick checks.
Yeah. The other one I'll mention, which is very public, is Target, right? They years ago, and we were lucky to be part of this, had a move toward product. I mean, our entry point was a move toward DevOps, right? With their Dojo thing. And but accompanying that, and you'll see this when transformation spaces, there's usually multiple changes going on. Because there needs to be multiple changes, and that's fine. But they were very successful at coupling all those things into a term they called plaid. So it was like product lean, agile. Uh,
DevOps.
I yeah, DevOps. I don't remember what I was, but innovation maybe. But which is like product. But anyway, it was cute. And that was just a kind of a sign of all of the things they put. They had this huge immersive learning dojo investment. We helped them scale up and form what it was and what the dojo would become. They had like product days, internal thought leaders around this coming to speak to their groups. They re-rolled. They did all of the things, and I think really enjoyed many years of having had switched to the product model in different groups, including like their supply chain group. Like some groups are extremely visible from the outside, but extremely critical to the operation of their company. We're operating in that kind of product model. So, it is to me, it's always moving the needle, maybe not all the way to the end, but saying, hey, did we start and kind of get, together to the next level? Great. That increases the appetite to take further steps, I think. So,
So,
all right. Well, hey, everyone, really appreciate it. Thanks again. Get in touch with us. Love to hear from you. And I think that's a webinar.
well, thanks everyone for joining today.